second speaker is right when he says that this is about people that don't have representation. But what side opposition has thus far failed to prove in this debate is why, once these populists move out of the fore and stop poisoning the well of discussion that happens in democracies across the world, while right-wing politicians cannot step in their stead to support these people in a way that does not contradict all of the 5 reasons that we told you, these populists behave that undermines democracy. The last speaker wanted to stand up and say, well, you haven't shown your links to violence. Ladies and gentlemen, that is fake news as we see it. Because all they wanted to put forward is model shape. What are your categories? How do we know if they're a populist? We give you 5 distinct reasons as to why we think these individuals are likely to fall into identifiable categories of being populist. But ultimately, they wanted only to engage with the extreme end of our scale, i.e. the banning of these individuals from running on the ballot box. Remember all of the other policies that we support, like no platforming them at universities, like stopping their social media pages from operating. These are all ways in which we can try and decrease the influence these populists are able to have. But finally, when the last speaker wants to raise a point about the chilling effect, ultimately, that is far worse when debate cannot happen in nuanced and moderate ways like we have today. Because instead, people are standing up and shouting that Mexicans are rapists. 3 areas of clash in this debate. Firstly, is this legitimate? Secondly, the provision of solutions and the effects on minorities. And thirdly, the stability of democracy. So on the first of which, is this legitimate? They stand up and give a principle that says, free speech is valuable and these individuals need to be able to engage. No, this does not directly engage with the principle that we give you about the balance of rights for individuals to be safe from fear. If you create an atmosphere of fear and an ignorance of the truth, you're ultimately far more likely to persecute vulnerable minorities. The response that they give as well, lack of representation is violence. Ladies and gentlemen, no, violence is violence. And given that they've done nothing to contend the fact that we've seen increased rates of attacks on vulnerable minorities in the aftermath of the US election, or the aftermath of Poland and the Law and Justice Party being put in power, or the example that we know all too well, that of Brexit, and individuals that no longer feel safe in their homes, on their streets or communities because of rises in attacks and persecutions upon you just because you're wearing a hijab. But secondly, they say, well, these people need to have a choice. But we question how meaningful that choice actually is if this politics is skewed away from key issues. Because what we told you is that populist parties overwhelmingly cannot have specific policies because they have to please a broad coalition of voters. It's very hard for you to have policies that both say we all provide welfare for the people at the bottom, i.e. Obamacare, but we also want to repeal those very acts that protect people. That means you don't get tangible policies that protect people, but only assertions. But finally here, they say, well, we got to give the people what they want. Ultimately, that is not the obligation of a democracy. We think that we should have parameters within the discussion occurs, that we do not allow anti-Semitism just because it's what some people want. That is called a tyranny of the majority that overwhelmingly harms the most vulnerable members of our society. But finally, they say, well, these politicians will likely moderate themselves once they're put into power. See the example of Le Pen. Note crucially, this is reliant on giving them a platform that allows them to get votes in the first place. Or in the very worst circumstances, make it into power. Given the author gives you analysis as to why, once they are in power, they're likely to put forward policies that harm those very minorities. We're not willing to allow them to moderate. We would rather nip them in the bud before they're allowed to wind up populations into voting them into power. Let's look secondly at the provisions of solutions and the effects on minorities. We give you concrete reasons as to why these populist politicians are reliant on harms to minorities in order to get into power. Firstly, we tell you that they overwhelmingly scapegoat these people to hold a coalition because they look to simple answers for complex questions. The only response that side opposition give is, well, some African Americans are not upset. They just retweet their opposition. Note crucially, that is an assertion that the vast majority of African Americans behave in that way. But secondly, we think there are many vulnerable individuals that would actually be quite insulted by your characterization of these people willingly just brushing aside these accusations of their lack of humanity. But secondly, more crucially, a permission mechanism is created, and they do nothing to engage with this analysis. Because if the orange man at the front of the room can stand up and say, well, it's okay for me to grab whatever by whatever, or it's okay for me to decide that Mexicans are all rapists, then people who are not predisposed to violence under the status quo are far more likely to engage in those very acts of violence. That's what we see. What were ordinary Americans now deciding to punch Black Lives Matter protesters in the face. We think that is a fundamental harm that arises from populism itself. But thirdly and finally, they get into power and they have the ability to implement policy. And this is a direct clash with their material about, well, we need to give these people some kind of choice and some kind of representation. If emboldening these individuals by giving them a populist platform from which to spew their views, you actually harm the debate and harm the rights of these individuals, it cannot be legitimate. But next here, they say, well, this is the, and I quote, elitist vernacular. And the logic here is that less educated people are unable to have debates about immigration unless someone stands up in the front of the room and shouts, get the immigrants out. Fundamentally, we think that's a patronizing characterization of how these individuals are able to engage in debates. But secondly, we think that what is far more likely is that you shut out nuanced discussions. Because if you think about things like the US primaries, individuals like Cruz or Pence wanted to have discussions about the policies and the ailments that globalization has caused for these people. Instead, we end up having conversations about the length of Donald Trump's fingers. Ultimately, we think that is far worse for the people that you want to protect under your side of the house. Because remember, we can provide real alternatives. So when they say, and I quote, not giving these individuals representation is an act of violence, if other politicians, as they likely will, step into the fray and represent these people instead, when populists cannot fill that vacuum and pollute the discussion, we're far more likely to protect these individuals. Let's look thirdly and finally at the stability of democracy. Their major claim here is to say, well, these courts act in irresponsible ways because, and I quote, prosecution is subjective. Now, they obviously ran into a problem with this when they also supported defamation suits and those very same courts making subjective decisions. Notably, they drop it in their most recent speech. But secondly, on your side of the house, what Geert Wilders can do is intentionally try and get defamation suits brought against him and use the fact that those suits have been brought to him in order to gain more popular support. If we shut down his Twitter page, he is unable to get those channels of discourse that ultimately mean he is more likely to get votes and more likely to be put into power. But finally here, they say politics is about character and it's okay for people to make decisions on this basis. Instead, you create a chilling effect on discourse, which harms those individuals. Ultimately, we think it is okay with limiting the amount of discourse that individuals like Breitbart or organizations that actively try to incite violence or limit the rights of minority groups through populist measures, if that means that we are far more able to secure the rights of vulnerable individuals. At the end of this debate, you have to remember we had two criteria. The first of which this was justified for the protection of minority groups. And secondly, that it was effective in challenging the disproportionate control that populists are able to wield over the most vulnerable. For all of these reasons, so proud to propose.